I will be dealing with editing. If we do get some time, we might try and write a few things, but this is not going to be one of those workshops where we write. I'm going to talk a few things. We're going to go through 2 poems and try to take it apart so that we understand what it is you're looking for when you want to edit. A couple of days ago, I was doing a workshop online, and actually I'm going to share my screen so you can see some of these things. And Marita Golden said something about editing, which I thought made a lot of sense. I thought I would use it for today. So she says the first draft is like your clay. Revision is when you actually start to mold. When you go back to your draft, you're going back as a craftsperson. And I've met different people who have different approaches to editing. As we go along, if I'm saying stuff that either accords or is completely opposite from what you do, say something in the chat and we can talk about it as we go along. But for me, the goal when editing is always to refine whatever I'm saying to the point where whoever is reading it gets exactly what I want them to get. Sometimes we think we're saying things that we're not actually communicating at all. So it's that moment, if we look at this quote, for example, it's when you go back that you start to figure out, okay, why am I repeating that? Does that word work there? Does that break work there? It's where you start to trim off all the things that don't matter and where you start to get intentional about all your choices. And in your poems, generally, you should be intentional about everything, right? Why the full stop is there? Why is it a short sentence instead of a long sentence? Why that particular verb was used. So the edit is where all of that gets to happen. If the moment you first go back, I mean, I think you've probably heard it said before that a writer's job is to ask questions, or a writer should always have questions. So in terms of editing, for me, one of the questions or some of the questions you should ask when you first go back to that piece of work are the ones I have on the screen right now. What do I know? What do I not know? What do I need to know? Why am I saying this? And do I need to say it? And again, do I need to say it here? There are times when we write things and we haven't figured out for ourselves why it's important, why we're writing it. I mean, it needed to be said, right? So that's why you're writing whatever you're writing, but you need to figure out the why. And something someone told me a long time ago is that you need to make sure that you move past your first answer to yourself about why, because they're going to be the basic reasons why you've written whatever you've written, but there's going to be something a little bit deeper, which tunes into why it mattered to you. And that's what you're trying to look for. If we, do we have any, is that a chat? 1 second. So if we move from the beginning of the poem, the first line, we'll come back to the title at the end. But if we go from the first line, we'll go here first. There's a Jack Myers quote. The whole thing is on the screen, but the only part I'm reading out is the part in bold. Your first line should make your reader want to read the poem. It's a first impression, right? And even more emphatic, I go back now to Marita Golden, is where she says you have to offer a contract to the reader so that they can't refuse. You need to make your language so powerful, so irresistible, that there is no way they can turn away. Now, you can't predict what your reader is going to do, but the whole point is that you make it so attractive that they actually want to go on. An exercise I do, when the world is open and we're doing sessions in person, is that I lay a whole bunch of books on the table. Poetry books for sure, but also fiction. And it's also an exercise that you might want to try at some point, and just pick out different first lines. And what you're looking for is what stands out for you. But you're also looking out for what you don't like, because it's important to realize the reasons why you like what you do like, but also why you don't like what you don't like. Because if you don't know, you replicate it in your own work without realizing. So we come back again, I guess, to intentionality in that regard. Now, moving through the body of your poem in terms of editing, you're looking to make sure that it connects completely. And on connection, there's a Nikki Giovanni. There's a Nikki Giovanni quote that if you've ever been in a workshop with me, you'd have heard it before, when she said somewhere, nobody cares what happened. They care how it made you feel, right? It's about the emotion of the thing. So when you're editing, again, you're trying to figure out, or you're trying to make clear what emotions your reader should be getting. What is the emotion your speaker is feeling at the time? And the way you make that work is obviously the tone of the work. And the tone is determined by the diction that you choose to use. So what we're going to do is, before I talk any more about, let me put this down. Before I talk any more about tone, we're going to look at a poem by Vivi Francis called Taking It, which I think shows a lot of the things that I think we should be looking for when we try to edit. I'm going to put it up, and you're going to tell me if you can read it, David. And then if not, I'll do the first part. Can you read it? I can't hear you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. So if you read all the way to neck, and then Jamelia can read from finger holds until the end.
Okay.
Cool.
Taking it. I never remember the knuckles, though his hand was bare, though their hands were bare. I remember the impressions left on this skin, the wilting and the welting. I don't remember the sound, not one smack. I remember the falls, myself falling to the floor or sidewalk, or against the brick wall. My head met after a push. There were many pushes. Girls pushed. I didn't push. I punched, pulled one down by the hair and kneed her as my head bled. Girls didn't punch until high school. I had always punched. What kind of girl are you? The kind who wants to live, I said, and I did want to until I didn't anymore. But I wanted the leaving to be on my terms, so I hit my father back. He owned me like any good country father. He waited for a husband to tame what he couldn't corral, to throw a rope like fingers around my neck.
Finger holds. I remember those, and me making a fist wrongly and punching the air when I missed a boy, and I didn't mean to miss, but to hit the line below the belly, the belt line. What broke me in the snow, my first year north. I'm still afraid to say his name. I wore shoes too thin for the weather. Who had ever seen such snow? And had a Georgia lilt like molasses on a sore throat, sweet, raw, and he hated the sound of it. He was black and I was black, and I was happy. I was so happy to be in Detroit. And he aimed for my heart-shaped mouth, my gapped teeth, my too sweet tongue. I felt the juvenile weight of him above me like snow after dark, falling steady and hard. I'm gonna teach you to talk regular. And I stopped speaking at all. I kept my swollen mouth shut and a straight razor in my math book and dreamt of a bat cracking against his chest. A woman like me with soft hands, not hands of the field, but hands meant to stroke and soothe, needs a weapon. So I studied the art of war and watched boxing, and where else was all this rage to go? Is this too dramatic? Find another story. Find a lie. In love, body after body fell beneath my own, though my own was broken, and I made love like a sea creature, fluid as if boneless, though my bones would rattle if not for the fat I cherish. Wouldn't you? How I grew to love the heavyweights, myself with one in the ring, how I imagined him punching me and punching me again, saying, I'm sorry, so sorry to have to love you this way.
Thank you. Before we break this down, what are the things that stand out for you here? We're talking about emotion, we're talking about tone.
Violence, the feeling of being overpowered, of being used as a punching bag, but like not by just one person, like multiple hands.
Hands, yes, which is a word she repeats a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get the emphasis across. Is there anything else before we?
Sense of ritual.
The sense of ritual, okay.
Yeah, that it's happening again and again in different ways. So I guess repetition. And yet what was clever about the language is, although it was kind of visceral, it didn't seem violent.
Yes, yes. And all of that is obviously with a function of the words she has used and the words that where she has placed the words, so that you as a reader, you can see the violence, you can even feel the violence, but you almost feel as though it's okay, or like not even okay, but that it's normal.
Yeah.
Which is where we come to when we talk about, you know, the right words in the best order. When you're editing, you're trying to make sure that you've put everything in the right place so that it has the right emphasis, so that your reader gets exactly the tone that you mean them to. You'll see that I put arrows all over this thing, just as a quick way to go through it in a session like this. So we talked about first lines before, right? I never remember the knuckles. You could say it's a striking line, or it might not be striking for you, but what it is unusual. It raises a question in the reader's mind. You want to find out, what about the knuckles, right? So you want to go to the next line, which is what we had said before. And as an aside to that, if you're writing a poem where you feel as though you're struggling with the facts, or you're struggling with memory, this is an exercise that you can do. You'll remember something. There'll be a bigger something maybe that you're trying to grasp, or you think that is bigger, but start with what you know. So this is, I don't remember this, but I remember that. I don't remember this, but I remember that. So that's a good exercise to do when editing sometimes. If I move on, his hands were bare, their hands were bare. She doesn't bother to say who his are, who their are. She assumes you already know, or you're going to find out. So she doesn't bother with the runway. I can't remember who it was who says you can either, is it that you either go into a poem through the door or through the window? And sometimes it's better to go in through the window because you're just right bang in the center of whatever story it is that you're telling, and this is that. Now, sound. Poems are sounds, right? And we're just always modulating the sound. Sometimes we put rhyme in because the rhyme sounds nice, so that it's sound over sense. This is an example where the sound works with the sense of the thing. So the Wilton and the Welton, that sound, you can hear the repetition. And then she kind of messes around with us a little, because she then says, I don't remember the sound, after giving us a bunch of sounds. So when we come into intentionality and how you arrange your words and how you introduce surprise or humor, This is an example of that. Now, in terms of verb choices, there are many interesting ones. The reason I highlighted met, for example, is that it's just very passive. The way my head met the brick wall after the push, like really, it's what Dave was saying earlier. We're talking about something very violent, but we're just saying, oh, my head met the brick wall. Your fist met my fist met your face, that kind of thing. So how are you choosing your verbs? Are you going through them during your edit to say, yes, maybe he walked is too basic. And what I want to say is that he glided, because that gives the reader a better sense of what was actually happening, not just with his movement, but with his feeling at the time. There were many pushes, girls pushed, another push, then punched, then pulled, all the p sounds, which we're speaking about violence. that plosive sound can be quite violent, even if it's subtly sometimes. So that is serving a function other than just, alliterating for no reason at all. Now, line breaks. I had always punched. Your power is going to come at the end of the line or at the beginning of the first line, or both, always. And it's a word that you have to rest on. You can't speed past always, right? So she has a point for putting it at the end so that you understand, yes, there's always been violence. It's what we're talking about here. It's almost like, so what? Although you don't yet get the power of the so what until we get to the end. Now, so I hit my father back. So far, we've been talking about the girls. And all of a sudden, the father comes into the picture. And it's surprising. And it also creates some kind of tension, because you're like, oh, her father too was violent. But it's such a beautiful turn that you don't dwell too much on that. Now you get to a point where, again, you want to be pushed past this point. You want to know what happens next. So basically, I guess where we're getting at there is what each of your lines propelling the reader towards the next thing. Now, in talking about tone and emotion and which words you choose, he owned me. None of us want to be owned. So in choosing that word own, you start to get a sense of the relationship between her and her father without her having to say, oh, he was this or he was whatever, right? So, and then when we go through, waited for a husband to tame what he couldn't corral, again, owned, tame, you get a feeling that all of these men, if not the father, then the boyfriend or boyfriends who we're going to get to in a second. Now, in terms of imagery, I'm someone who I have a lot of imagery running through my poems. So the question is always, are they consistent? Do they work with each other, or are they just pretty? Some things are just pretty, and we struggle to let go of them because, maybe it was difficult to get that image to work, or what we think is work when we wrote it the first time. But you need to be careful that something isn't just there for the sake of, being there. He waited for the husband to throw a rope like fingers around my neck. You get the noose without her having to say noose. But because she's using fingers, she's using neck, these are things that are on you, that are with you. You're almost doing it yourself. And if you're not physically doing it, you can feel it. So we go back to the Dobyns quote when he says that the work of the poem is not just to make your reader know the emotion, but to feel the emotion. So again, word choices, right? Now, we'll soon be done with this. He was Black and I was Black and I was so happy and he aimed for my heart. I mean, we come back again to the nice lull of the language. It's cutesy. I was this and I was that, and you're almost expecting something lovely. And what you get instead is, and he aimed for my heart-shaped mouse, blah, blah, blah. The word aim is the one that tells us, no, we've stepped out of beauty. We've stepped out of anything love-like. And it's just, and it's tiny. You could miss it. But these are the things when, if you're reading, and you should be reading other poets, that you're also trying to see. If you're reading as a poet, you're looking to see what devices they've used. How have they slipped in these little words in places that have changed the whole meaning of something? How is somebody able to talk about violence so delicately so that it doesn't feel violent, but you know it? And then going down where she says, well, he was violent, basically, and so I became violent too. And she says it so matter-of-factly. It's almost as though, yeah, I was nice and I was this and that, and he hit me. So I started to learn how to hit him back. And she's just accepted it. But she doesn't accept it in a passive kind of way. She gets into a different voice here, where she's addressing the reader directly. It's almost as though she knows that the reader at this point is thinking, oh my gosh, why would you let that happen? Why would you stay there? And so she addresses the reader. Is this too dramatic? Find another story, find a lie. Like there's a power in there. Like, even though those things happened, I'm still, I'm owning whoever I am in this moment. But all that power kind of goes away a little. And you come back to vulnerability when she says, wouldn't you? Because she's like, yeah, this is what it is. I own it. But what would you do, other than just fall in love and keep falling in love, even if they keep beating you up and you keep fighting them? And I think I mentioned, or if I didn't, your poems should always have tension somewhere in them, tension and rest. And she does that really well here. I mean, she's been doing it all along. But the way she says, how I grew to love the heavyweights, myself with one in the ring, how I imagined him punching me, again saying, sorry, I'm so sorry to have to love you this way. I mean, in that one long sentence, how I grew to love them. I mean, it's a weird way to use the word love, right? But it contextualizes the whole poem. And then when she says, how I imagined him, why would you imagine somebody punching you? But the word imagine, the contradiction of it, the tenderness of it, juxtaposed with what she's imagining, is another thing in terms of tone and emotion and the power here. Just like the last two lines, I'm sorry, so sorry to have to love you this way. So she knows they don't love her. She's heard it, but she's not registering it. And I mean, for me, that's one of my favorite poems in terms of going through to see what devices are being used and what she's done that I can repeat. So she's covered, I mean, just looking through that, we looked at tone, we looked at first lines, we looked at where lines end, and how you manipulate your reader's emotions, basically. We're gonna do a quick writing exercise right now. In terms of tone, since we just talked about Vivi, we'll do one exercise that I got from her. The statement, one thing I want you to know about me, it could be very basic, but if you write that down, and then I want you to figure out how you want to say that. What is the tone? So is it just a basic, you just met someone, one thing I want you to know about me? Is there somebody you want to beat up? One thing I want you to know about me is, like, what is the feeling behind you saying those words? And then just free write for 5 minutes, having first written your prompting emotion down so that you know what you're trying to achieve. So we'll do that for 5 minutes, and then whoever wants to share, we can talk about that in a bit. I'll start the clock now. So you have about 1 minute and 30 seconds left. Right. If you would like to share, please put your name in the chat. And what we're going to do is you read either the whole thing or a section of whatever it is that you've written. And the rest of us are going to try to figure out what the emotion was, or what the general mood of why you're saying what you're saying is.
I can go.
So who's that?
Jamelia.
Jamelia.
One thing I want you to know about me is how my bones creak after resting, how sleep is never enough to revive the parts of me I cannot touch, and how then can I allow people into a space I know only by the ache it gives me, the way my knees struggle to follow my morning rituals. All they see is armor, strength, a collage of resilience. But this is all body paint I drew before leaving the house. By nightfall, it will smudge and peel, dissolve into running water, and remind the mirror who I really am when I'm alone.
Thank you. I think that was clear, but what is it that we think the emotion was that she had before she started writing? If you just think on it and put it in the chat. I'm gonna share my screen and try to find the other poem. So we'll come back to that in a second. The other poem that I wanted us to go through today is called The Erotic is a Measure Between by Carl Dagan. I will read, and if you can, as we're going along, pay attention to what stands out for you. Ignore the red marks, which are me and not part of the poem. And what stands out for you what gives you a clue into the tone of and the emotion of the poem. Your body is not my pommel horse, nor my Olympic pool or diving board. Your body is not my personal internet channel, nor my timeline, nor my warm Apollo spotlight. Your body is not my award gala. Your body is not my game, preseasons or playoffs. Your body is not my political party convention. Your body is not my front line or my wars theater. Your body is not my time trial. Your body is not my entrance exam or naturalization interview. I am a citizen of this skin, not alone, and yours is not to be passed, nor won. What is done when we let our bodies sharpen the graphite of each other's bodies is not my test. Not my solo show. One day I'll learn. I'll prove I know how to lie with you without anticipating the scorecards of your eyes. How I might merely abide. We two, unseated, equidistant from the wings, in a beaten black box, all stage. So metaphors are obviously something that are a standard tool when we're doing poetry. One of the reasons why I chose this poem for us to go through today was because of the way he's used metaphor. So he's used reductive metaphors, which is when you describe something by what it isn't, right? So again, we come back to sometimes we don't quite know how to describe a thing. And in the same way as in the other poem, we were saying we might not fully remember whatever it is that we want to talk about, but we'll remember parts, and we should use those parts and see how we can use the lack of memory as well. Here, each time he says not, you're focused. First of all, you're focused on the not because of all the repetitions of it, but also all the imagery that he brings forward. And there's a lot of imagery here, but everything ties into one another. We're talking about sports. We're talking about something that you have to win. We're talking about, and he's basically talking about a relationship. He's talking about a sensual exchange between partners. So where you see me put the slashes at the end, for example, your body is not my personal internet. Although it's internet channel, his decision to enjambe the internet and to emphasize that immediately gives us as readers a clue into what do we all know what the internet is. You're surfing all the time. You probably have 10,000 tabs open, which you're not paying attention to. If you look at that in the context of a relationship, you don't want your partner to be that. Your partner doesn't want to be that. So in as much as he's saying all the nots, he's also giving you the kind of imagery that shows you what he's talking about. So when they say show, don't tell, which is something we should all remember, the whole idea is that he's giving you the kind of image that allows you to be able to make sense of it from your own experience. And it is when you're able to make sense of it from your own experience that it resonates. Other than that, sometimes we hear pretty lines and it's pretty at the time, but it doesn't stick because you didn't have to pull anything from yourself for it to hold on to. So when he keeps going down, he's through the poem, he's building on that feeling of you're not a game, you're not something to gaze at, you're not something to surf, you're not something to cram, you're not an exam, you're not a naturalization interview, which is such a weird image when you're talking about a relationship or sex with somebody that you love, to look at it as a naturalization interview, but it's serving a point, right? And the unusualness, again, of the thing, it's exciting for you as the reader. So you're looking to see where in your work does humor arise? Where in your work does repetition arise? Is the repetition on purpose? Is the rhyme on purpose? If it is, what is it serving in the context? If it's not serving anything in the context, then maybe take it out. And as he layers all the way through not, by the time he gets to One Day I'll Learn, it opens up. It opens up an opportunity for the reader to see if there's a different, to see what the context was for why he started saying all this anyway. One Day I'll Learn, is it because she said something and now he's kind of reckoning with himself, like, no, I really didn't mean it that way. You know, is it like the various options as to why this started, right? And the One Day I'll Learn is short. Everything else has been really long in comparison to that. So you have long sentences with tension, you have rest with shorter sentences, and he's manipulating, you know, the emotion by being able to go back and forth in that way. And then with everything being so sports, language heavy and go, when he gets to the end and he's actually saying, this is what it is, this is what I want, this is how I want to be. We're using words like abide. I mean, it's so sweet and delicate and nothing like any of the language and imagery that we've seen before. And in that, he's able to translate or transmit what it is that he's saying he wants in a relationship. So again, coming back to our poems, what are we saying when we finished writing it, when you're reading through your edits? It's good to get somebody else to read your work out loud for you, because sometimes you can already start editing from that, because you can get you can already start to figure out what doesn't work when somebody else reads it in a way where you're like, no, but this is how, if you have to explain, this is how, then something is obviously not working. Also, I always say when you finish writing and you're trying to figure out why it was written, if you haven't done that yet, sometimes it's good to maybe take your phone and record the explanation of whatever it was that you were trying to do. There are times when the poem is clearer in the explanation than it is in the poem. And so maybe the explanation is where the poem is. And that's where you should start in that case. Something else is with regards to detail. So each of these poems have had a lot of detail in them. And not just detail with regards to fact, but again, we're talking about detail that allows your reader to enter into the poem with you. So a lot of times, whenever we're writing about big universal things, we don't put in enough detail or specificity, maybe is a better word. So we talk about, I don't know, love. We talk about, an example I used in a workshop a couple of weeks ago was when the Twin Towers fell in New York, or even when Grenfell happened. You know, you get lots of poems around that time. People want to write, people want to share their emotions about what is going on, and they write these huge things, and it's very emotive. But how resonant is it? Especially if you just write in the bigness of it. You talk about anger, you talk about tears, you talk about what everybody else is talking about. What are you saying that is different? So there's this poem by, I can't remember his first name, last name is Norse. When the Twin Towers fell, he wrote a poem about the sniffer dogs and how the sniffer dogs were getting depressed because they couldn't find anybody's. So the firemen basically, I think they made them smell buttons or something like that. And they basically went to hide in places so that the dogs could find them. Just to, to help the dogs in terms of the emotional the emotional heaviness of the whole thing. And he ends the poem by saying something like, who will hide for us? You know, as the firemen, who will hide for us? And that poem stays with me, because you're talking about such a huge thing, but you're looking for an angle that not too many people are talking about. Same thing if we talk about love. Love in itself, just the word, it doesn't say anything. People love in different ways. But if you start to tell me the details of how whoever it is loved you or didn't, what it felt like, you know, use all the senses, what it felt like, what it looked like, then I can get into it with you. Not just because you have told me, but because the way you have told me allows me to tap into my own experiences, maybe of the same thing or the opposite of that. Can't remember who it was who said a poem is like an argument. The evidence comes in various ways, but a major way that it comes is in detail. So always make sure that you're showing your reader, that you're painting a picture, I guess is the best way to say that, as we move through. Now I'm going to run through a few things. I see it's 1:15. I'm going to run through a few things in terms of what to weed out and what to avoid. So some of them I've said already. Things to weed out: lazy or inactive verbs, unnecessary repetition, check your rhymes. Going back to the Vivey poem, check where you have put your most important words. If we have said, or if it's a given that the emphasis is either at the end of a line or at the beginning of it, and you have put your most important word somewhere in the center, you might weaken, you know, the power of what it is. Also, if you have repeated a bunch of things, but you didn't mean to repeat it, then you might end up giving something center stage that is not, you know, the center of your poem. I spoke a little bit about jumping in through the window instead of the runway before. So the runway, a lot of times, for many of us, you don't get to the meat of your poem until the end. It's kind of like you're working your way through it, and then suddenly you land on this thing, and then you end your poem there, when in reality, maybe that's where the poem starts. So you might need to do, instead of just a light edit, you might need some deep revision, where what you end up with in the end looks absolutely nothing like what you started with. You know, I did a workshop a few years ago, and I thought the poem was complete because I had workshopped it for ages. And, you know, there's a film of it, that, you know, there's a short film project, there's all this stuff. And I think it was actually Vivey read it and said something like, oh, you know, interest in language, but you don't know where the power is. You say something powerful and then you kill it. And I was like, well, okay. And then she said, where you ended is kind of where it needs to begin. The other stuff might come back into the poem, but what I want you to do is take that last line, use it as your first line. Do not look at anything else you wrote before. If it's meant to come back, it'll come back to you naturally. Write it again. Some of it came back naturally. Some of it didn't. And so there became a different version of that poem. And then a few weeks ago, I'm editing for my book, which comes out in October. Again, like I said, I thought this poem was done. This time, Jacob Sam-LaRose says, okay, why don't you try this? I still think you need to shave it a little bit more. So I do all the shaving he asked me to do. And he's like, yeah, it's cool. And then a few days later, he says, have you ever done a sestina? And I'm like, no, it's not gonna happen. But it did happen. And then once again, this poem has taken on a third life. So I guess what I'm saying with all of that is sometimes your poem has started at the end and you need to follow where the thing is leading you to, and see what happens, see where it goes, instead of just insisting that you already have it. Something else to always check: unnecessary editorial comments or exposition, this is a kind of runway sometimes, but sometimes it's more than that. There are times when we just don't trust that the reader is going to get what we've said. So we've said it, but then now we need to say it in a different way, and then we need to explain it. We should check that. You need to trust that you've done enough work. And if you have done enough work, then you don't need to summarize it for them. They're already summarizing it in their heads because you've opened the door for them to enter and feel it. So they're feeling it as they're going along. They're not just reading what you told them. Things to avoid. I don't have to say cliche, you know that already. If you are going to use cliche, upturn it somehow, make it interesting. Avoid things that are obvious. The sky is blue. Why are you telling me? Most of the time it is blue, or the leaf was green. Yes. And then what? And something I read a few weeks ago in something, we were lying down with our backs to the grass, staring at the sky. If your back is on the grass, what else are you staring at? If it's not the sky, if that's where it stops, if it's not going anywhere else, then why are you telling me? So your poem needs to be concise. So cut out the things that aren't necessary. Now again, basic things which are repeating some of the things that we've said. Why does your poem start where it starts? Why does it have the point of view that it has? So maybe you've done it in first person. You might want to try it in second or try it in third. You might end up going back to the first person in the end, but trying it in the other voices gives you the opportunity to maybe tap into some of the details that may have gotten short shrift before. Because if you're speaking in another voice, sometimes you see other things that you didn't see before. Be suspicious of what you consider to be the most successful parts of the poem that you've written. Just because a line is well written doesn't mean it is necessary, which is something I kind of said a little before. Titles. A few days ago, I always talk about titles because some people are good at titles. Some people just don't like them, so you put lazy things in. And I read, see you raising your hand. Then I read something a while back. Somebody sent me a manuscript, and I think it had number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And I kept thinking, this will change. Maybe like we're building up to something or there's a reason, but I never saw the reason. So what is your title doing? It's an opportunity that you shouldn't waste. Your title, it should lift weight for you. It should do work for you. Kaveh Akbar tweeted a phrase that he says is from Nicole Seeley a few days ago. And I screenshot it because I thought, oh, that works. It says, a title is not garnish. It's doing the revelatory work of contextualizing and situating the poem within larger conversations. Yeah. So a title is not garnish. You can't just waste the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen again just so you can take a picture if you're doing that of make that a little bit bigger of this, which is just like a description of 4 different types of titles. So when you're working through what you might want to do, or if you're having issues, you might look. You might be able to look through this and say, okay, these are the types, or some of the types. Now, how do I mess around to use one of them? Or maybe you're doing a poem that doesn't really have a narrative flow, or that is a fractured narrative that you think people might be able to or will get lost in. And then the title is that thing that you use to bring them home. Maybe it doesn't make sense to the reader at the beginning, but when they finish it, they come back and the title holds it together. So the title itself can be almost like a first line that is the thing that makes you, come back and gives new meaning to the piece. Now, in terms of clarity, sometimes clarity in sometimes we think we're being smart with different phrases that we manage to use. And there's a double entendre or a triple entendre or something, and we don't want to let go of it. And a question or a thing to always note is that there's a fine line between ambiguity and confusion. So you need to check what side of that you're bordering on. And the last thing I will say, which I think is from Dobyns, but I can't remember, is a quote that goes, "The poem, for the most part, is a private conversation that the reader eavesdrops on or is allowed to hear, with the hope that it might touch his or her life. The poet needs to make room for the reader's presence and help them overhear or make understanding possible." Now, the way that works is all the things we've talked about, how you choose your words, how intentional you are with every single thing. And when I say intentional, I don't mean an excuse, because sometimes you like, oh, that's there because da 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 da. But it's not really, it might just be the basic answer, but it's not the real answer. If you're using long white spaces, if you're using a dash somewhere, or those poems that have slashes through, for example, if you're breaking your line in an odd place, like, why are you doing all those things? You need to question every single thing. And then you also need to let the poem speak to you. So I'll end on that note. If there are any questions, just raise your hand or put it in the chat.
I have a question.
Yes.
What book would you recommend, like a craft book for editing, for people that are trying to get better at it?
For editing?
Yeah, or just for like getting your work to a good standard.
The Dobyns, I'm just gonna see if I can find it.
Show us your bookshelf. Show us all of the things.
My bookshelf. Oh no, I think I put it. That's my bookshelf. Those are my crafts books. But oh no, it's here. Next word, better word, the craft of poetry, which is this one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's got a bunch of essays. It's got one passage on revision, something on line breaks, syllables. It's got this one was really good. It was one that I was able to go through pretty easily. And I think it helps a lot. There's also, oh yeah. This one isn't really, well, actually, no, this is the wrong one. This is The Art of Daring. The Art of series are supposed to be good, but the one I normally recommend is The Art of Recklessness.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another very easy read, but which helps you to approach craft in a, less, sometimes you think craft and you're just like, I can't, form, da 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 da. It's one that breaks things down a lot easier than some of the others I've been through. The Longman Dictionary of Poetics is not a craft book in the same way as these other things are. It's a poetic dictionary, but in saying that, it has like 12 pages on metaphors, or about 10 pages just talking about titles and giving you examples and explaining things. So it's one that I keep and I go through every now and again. I think those are the ones that come to mind. And then Ted Kuza's Poetry Home Repair Manual is another one. And people are on different journeys with regards to editing and craft and books, because I remember I had some of these like very early days when I first started writing poetry, and I just couldn't, they just felt impenetrable. So Ted Kuza, I read back then, and I used to go back to, but there were like maybe 2 or 3 chapters that I could use, but I couldn't really get through the whole thing until maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's one of the easier ones. There's some of the others where I'm just like, it's not for me. So I guess it's about finding out what works best, which is why I say The Art of Recklessness is a good place to start.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we are going to give away 1 copy of The Art of Recklessness and 1 copy of, was it Next Word, Better Word?
Yeah.
To people who tag us on Instagram or Twitter with their feedback from the session. So yeah, and then we'll give out copies of your book once it comes out, so we can do that too. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Zara.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been like this whole session's been amazing. I asked a lot of problems of editing. When you were talking about how you did the sestina, I found that really interesting. Do you have any know any other poetic, I don't know, formats or I've forgotten the word, like the sestina, that would be good to like play around with? Sorry.
No, I don't know if this is I don't know if the sestina is one that I'll easily play around with, although I made Gems do one the other week. But I think it's, especially when you have a like a ritual or something that repeats a lot, sestina is good for that. But maybe it's not the place to start. I mean, you have the basics of a sonnet, for example. You can do that. Something that the golden shovel, we all know what the golden shovel is. Cool. So golden shovel is a good form. Also, I'm messing around with things. A cento is a good form, but it's not. I mean, a cento is basically patchwork poem, right? you're taking lines from other people's poems to create your own, but it's something. And then you have the basics of a, gosh, what's it called? 3 lines.
A tercet?
Sorry?
No, that's just it. I said a tercet, but it's not the form.
No, the Japanese form.
Haiku?
You have the haikus, and then you have riffs of the various riffs of the haiku that you can try as well. Yeah, I would basically just, there are quite a few websites that have a few different forms on them. I would look through and see what looks the least intimidating and start from there. Like a Tezarima, I think, was one that I tried early on. And then just work your way up and through the things. If you're somebody who already knows how to count in terms of, you know, stresses and unstresses and all of that kind of stuff, then you can look at different forms that use that. So you have your couplets, you have your Alexandrine couplet, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But it all depends on how much you know at this point, and how much whether the form you want to do is because you want to practice some other thing that you've already learned, or you're practicing the form in itself. So yeah.
Thank you.
David has a question.
I can't hear you.
There we go. Hi, Tolu. Thanks for a great session. Really enjoyed it. I want to ask you, when you're starting a poem, do you always know what structure you're writing in, or does that change in the editing process?
No, I never know what structure I write in. I mean, maybe 1 out of 10 times I will know, because I know that's what I wanted to write. If you're doing a golden shovel, for example, you will know, right? And if you're doing a sonnet, you know, if you're doing one of the more fixed forms, you will know from, but even then I wouldn't say from the start. Sometimes you will know from the start, but it might be a thing of you get the poem or the thing, the emotional word dump that is trying to come out of you, maybe you just write that down as the first thing, and then in your editing, you try and see what fits, because sometimes the poem doesn't work because you're trying to stick it into the wrong form, because you told yourself, I have to write, I don't know, a sonnet or a sestina, and the poem doesn't want to be a sonnet or a sestina, so you kind of have to listen to where the poem wants to go as well.
Do you try several different structures with a poem, or is it more obvious? You think, oh no, this is this.
I wouldn't say it's obvious. I try different things. I try and break it in different places just to see what, how that changes the meaning. And with regards to properly formulaic forms, that hasn't really been my forte. I do them when I'm messing around personally, but it's not what I put out. So for example, in the collection, there's that sestina, but it's probably apart from poems in tercets, and do I have a sonnet? I don't think I have a sonnet. I think apart from the sestina, I don't think there's anything else that is properly, formulaic in that sense. Having said that, there's been a lot of time that has gone behind, where each break is, what lines are, where do I have 4 lines, where do I have 3 lines, why? So I think all of that, regardless of how you do it, whether it's before or after you've written the first thing, you do still end up spending lots of time trying to figure out if it's the best decision.
Thank you.
Cool.
Any other
right.
questions burning before Tolu leaves us? I think you're good.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're all going to have better edits now. We're going to watch this back. I'm going to watch it back again while I'm trying to edit something. Oh, let people know where they can find you, Tolu, and where your book is, what's it called, and how they can get it.
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram with my name. And my book is called Locating Strong Women, and it will be out on the 1st of October with Jacaranda Books. And I believe it's open for pre-order, but it doesn't have a cover yet. So yeah.
It is. And there's lots of people in the YouTube that are saying thank you very much, and they really enjoyed the session.
Cool.
So thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.